There is a number that runs your life more than any other, more than your salary, more than your savings, more than anything in your bank account. It's the number you hand over before the month even begins, your rent. Most people think high rent is just the market doing what markets do. Supply, demand. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. I am Mr. B, broke by design, and tonight we're opening the rent file. Picture a city, any city. In this city, 2 families have been watching their rent go up every year for the last decade. Not a little, a lot. 30% in 3 years in some neighborhoods, 50% in 5 years in others. They ask their landlord why. The landlord says, costs are up, market rates, there's nothing I can do. They ask the city council why. The council says, we need more housing, we're working on it. They ask the news why. The news says, supply and demand, too many people, not enough homes. All of those answers contain a fragment of the truth. None of them tells you the whole story. The whole story involves a century of deliberate policy decisions that restricted where housing could be built and who could build it. It involves corporations buying up tens of thousands of homes not to live in but to extract rent from. It involves local governments protecting the property values of people who already own at the direct expense of people who don't. High rent is not a weather event. It does not simply happen. It is the logical output of a system built to make housing scarce, because scarcity is what makes it valuable. The question is not, why is rent so high? The question is, who decided it should be? The foundations of today's rent crisis were laid in the early 20th century, and they were laid deliberately. In the 1910s, American cities began adopting zoning laws. On paper, zoning was about organizing land use, separating factories from homes, commercial districts from residential ones. In practice, it quickly became something else entirely. Single-family zoning, rules requiring that land be used only for individual detached houses, was used almost immediately as a vehicle for segregation. Berkeley, California introduced zoning laws in the early 1910s designed explicitly to exclude certain communities from certain areas. St. Louis changed neighborhood zoning designations from residential to industrial when black families moved in. The strategy spread across the country with remarkable speed. By the 1930s, the Federal Housing Administration was refusing to insure mortgages in neighborhoods where black families lived, the practice that became known as redlining. White families flooded into government-subsidized suburban homes. Black families were locked out. The suburbs built generational wealth for one group. The inner cities, systematically disinvested, built nothing. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 made explicit racial discrimination in housing illegal, but it did not undo the zoning. It did not redistribute the wealth that had accumulated. It did not build the housing that had been withheld. And crucially, it did not stop exclusionary zoning from continuing by economic means rather than racial ones. The map that excluded by race became the map that excludes by price. The mechanism changed. The outcome stayed the same. So how does the shortage stay manufactured? 4 mechanisms. First, exclusionary zoning. More than 75% of residential land in most American cities is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. This means apartments, multifamily buildings, and denser affordable housing are illegal to build on the vast majority of urban land. Less housing built means less housing available. Less housing available means higher rents. Every year those zoning laws stay in place, the shortage compounds. Second, the corporate landlord machine. After the 2008 financial crisis, investment firms and real estate corporations purchased hundreds of thousands of homes at rock-bottom prices. The largest corporate landlord in the United States now controls over 122,000 rental units. These are not mom-and-pop landlords covering their mortgage. These are financial instruments optimized for return. Their incentive is not to provide housing, it is to maximize the rent extracted from housing. Third, the AI pricing system. Several major corporate landlords used algorithmic pricing software, tools that coordinated rent increases across thousands of properties simultaneously by sharing occupancy and pricing data. What this created in practice was market-wide rent inflation without explicit coordination between landlords, every building raising prices together, driven by the same algorithm. The U.S. Department of Justice launched an antitrust case examining these practices. Fourth, political protection of existing homeowners. Most city councils are dominated by homeowners. Homeowners benefit financially when housing supply stays restricted. Scarcity pushes up property values. So the political incentive for local governments is to keep zoning restrictive, to approve as little new affordable housing as possible, and to protect existing neighborhoods from the density that would bring rents down. The people who benefit from high house prices vote in local elections. The renters being priced out often don't or can't because they've already been displaced. High rent does not hurt everyone equally. Property developers profit when land is scarce. Scarcity inflates the value of everything they already own before they build a single new unit. Corporate landlords profit directly from every rent increase. Their entire business model depends on housing remaining a seller's market. Financial institutions profit from the mortgages, REITs, and investment vehicles built around housing scarcity. Local governments protect existing homeowners who are disproportionately wealthy and white because those homeowners vote and donate and show up to planning meetings. The renter being displaced 3 neighborhoods away does not have a seat at that table. And here is the number that ties it together. Home ownership remains the primary way most families build wealth in the United States. The racial home ownership gap, itself a direct product of redlining and exclusionary zoning, means Black and Latino families were systemically denied access to the wealth-building machine that housing represents. The rent they pay every month is not just expensive, it is wealth that leaves their hands and never comes back. Let's make this real. A family has been in the same flat for 6 years. They've painted it, repaired things the landlord should have fixed, built a life in those 4 walls. Their children go to the school 2 streets away. The mother works at the hospital across the road. This is not just a rental unit, it is a community. Then the building gets sold, not to another individual landlord, to an investment company registered through a limited liability corporation whose actual ownership is nearly impossible to trace. Within 18 months, the rent has increased by 40%. The family cannot absorb it. They look for alternatives in the same area. Every comparable flat has had a similar increase. The algorithm touched everything. They move 30 minutes further from the hospital, an hour from the school. The commute costs money. The childcare costs more. The disruption costs them things that don't have a dollar value. The neighbor who watched the kids, the shopkeeper who knew their name, the community that had been built over 6 careful years. The investment company's balance sheet looks better than ever. The family is not a failed renter. They are not a cautionary tale about budgeting. They are the human output of a system designed to extract maximum value from the place people have to sleep. Housing is not a luxury. It is the foundation everything else stands on. When that foundation is unstable, nothing else can be either. Here is what understanding this actually changes, and here the solutions go deeper than usual because the problem is deep enough to deserve it. The instinct when rent gets too high is to move, to stretch, to cut elsewhere, to absorb it quietly. All of that is understandable, but it is worth knowing that the high rent is not a natural phenomenon you are adapting to. It is a policy outcome, and policy outcomes can be reversed. Individual tools. What renters can use right now. Know your rights before your landlord does. Many cities have rent stabilization or rent control ordinances that cap annual increases, but landlords don't advertise this. In California, statewide rent caps limit increases to 5% plus local inflation, or 10% maximum. Washington caps increases at 10% or less. Washington, D.C. is one of the most aggressive, capped at the Consumer Price Index plus 2%. If you are in a rent-controlled city and your landlord has exceeded the legal cap, you have grounds to challenge it. Contact your local tenants union or housing authority before you accept any increase as final. Tenant unions work. A single renter has almost no leverage against a corporate landlord. A building of organized tenants has considerably more. Rent strikes, collective bargaining, and coordinated legal action have forced corporations to negotiate and in some cases reverse increases. The tool exists. Most renters don't know it. Document everything. Every maintenance request in writing. Every rent increase notice filed and dated. Every communication with the landlord saved. If a dispute goes to tribunal or court, documentation is the difference between winning and losing. The corporate landlord has a legal team. The individual renter has records, or doesn't. Housing vouchers and assistance programs are underused. Many renters who qualify for housing assistance never apply, either because they don't know they qualify, the application process is deliberately difficult, or the wait lists feel impossibly long. Apply anyway. The wait list is long because the need is real and the funding is insufficient, not because the program doesn't work for the people who reach it. The structural solutions, where the real change lives. Zoning reform is the most powerful lever available. Cities that have reformed exclusionary zoning have seen real results. Minneapolis eliminated single-family zoning entirely in 2020, allowing multifamily buildings citywide. Auckland, New Zealand did the same and saw new housing construction increase dramatically and rent growth slow relative to comparable cities. Cincinnati passed its Connected Communities policy in June 2024, a set of zoning reforms specifically designed to increase affordable housing production. Oregon passed statewide zoning reform, allowing middle-density housing across most residential land. These are not utopian proposals. They are things cities have done and measured. Rent stabilization where it doesn't exist. Only Oregon and California currently have statewide rent control. More than 30 states actively ban local governments from implementing their own. Organizing to change those preemptions, to give cities the legal right to protect their renters, is a specific, winnable fight that tenant organizations across the country are currently pursuing. Corporate landlord regulation and transparency. The anonymity of LLC ownership structures makes it nearly impossible for tenants to identify who actually owns their building. Legislation requiring disclosure of beneficial ownership, who actually controls the LLC, already exists in some forms. Expanding these requirements would give tenants, journalists, and regulators the ability to hold large corporate landlords accountable in ways that are currently impossible. Investing in social and public housing. The United States has dramatically underinvested in public housing for decades. Countries with robust social housing systems, Austria, Singapore, Finland, maintain affordable housing across income levels through public ownership rather than relying entirely on the market to provide it. The argument that public housing doesn't work is not a universal truth. It is a description of what happens when public housing is deliberately defunded. Down payment assistance and first-generation homebuyer programs. Because homeownership is the primary wealth-building vehicle in the U.S. system, policies that help renters become owners, particularly those from communities historically locked out, directly address the racial wealth gap that exclusionary housing policy created. These programs exist. They are underfunded. Expanding them is a direct counterweight to decades of exclusion. None of these solutions are magic. None of them are fast, but each one is a door that is already open somewhere in the world, and the reason it is not open everywhere is not because it doesn't work. It is because the people who benefit from it staying closed have more political representation than the people who need it open. That is not fatalism. That is the map, and the map shows where the pressure needs to go. The number that runs your life. You now know where it came from. A century of zoning decisions, a decade of corporate consolidation, an algorithm that coordinated what a handshake couldn't, and a political system that kept voting for the people who benefit from all of it. Rent didn't happen to you. It was architected around you. The file is open now. What you do with what's inside, that part belongs to you. Broke by design. Back next week with another one. Keep your eyes open.